You're a podcast listener, and this is a podcast ad. Reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Lips and Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a reproduced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience with Lips and Ads. Go to lipsandads.com now. That's LIBSYN ads.com.
Yeah, when I was a sophomore in high school, I got a D plus in algebra, and I worked for that D plus, my God. And now they just give it away. Welcome back to Fill in the Blanks. My guest today is a remarkable figure who has made a significant contribution, many in fact, in advocating for American Muslim voices and promoting the principles of liberty and freedom. Now, we have met before. I'm talking about Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. In the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, Dr. Jasser founded the American Islam Forum for Democracy, AIFD, and the organization aims to provide an American Muslim voice that advocates for the preservation of the founding principles of the United States, particularly the Constitution, liberty, freedom, through the separation of mosque and state. And he is also author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam. He's a former U.S. Navy lieutenant commander, a physician in private practice of primary care at the Jasser Center for Comprehensive Care. He's former vice chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and a Republican candidate for Congress in Arizona's 4th District. So check out zforarizona.com. We're taking a deep dive into his work that continues to inspire and challenge really conventional narratives. As I say, I've had him on the show before and was so impressed that I've been stalking him to get him here so I could have a more fulsome and in-depth conversation because we didn't have near enough time on the show. So, Doctor, welcome back.
It's great to be with you, Dr. Phil, and also a longtime fan, and thank you for all that you've done for our country and your clarity and leadership. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate your saying that. So you're in the middle of a campaign right now. When do the ballots go out?
Yeah, the ballots go out July 3rd, and the primary day is July 30th. And I don't think there's ever been a time in which there's been a clearer choice, not only in our primary, as the previous candidates ran before, but this district is now a swing district. Greg Stanton has been a rubber stamp for the Biden administration, and that rubber stamp includes horrific economic policies, a hemorrhaging border, an immigration policy that's destroying our country, the inflationary economy. Just families have had it with the crime, the fentanyl, the intervention in their choices for schools, and so many things that you've talked about so much on your program, foreign policy. And, it's sort of been a culmination of my work to run for Congress. A lot of my vetting that I've had nationally, encountering the radical Islamists and standing up for medical freedom, for patients' choice during the pandemic, one of the few docs nationally that really took on the medical establishment. So it became really natural for me to put my hat in the ring and feel that I could leave a legacy that our country has been missing so far in the very radicalized politics of the far left.
Well, it certainly has. How's the campaign going so far?
Oh, it's going. It is amazing. The support has just been amazing, and the grassroots. We have made a lot of headway in the debates that we've had. People have seen a clear choice of someone who's been a lifetime conservative, but also I can tell you my practice. I have been a primary care doc for so many thousands of families here in the district, and families come away. I've got supporters from all types of political spectrums, from the left to the right, that say, listen, we want somebody we can trust, somebody that not only talks the talk, but walks the walk. So, I think that I can bring, and this is seen in my endorsements. We've been endorsed from Charlie Kirk and Brandon Tatum all the way to Senator Kyle, Governor Brewer, Hugh Hewitt, Glenn Beck, and so many of your colleagues that have been endorsing my campaign nationally and locally, with Sal DeCiccio and other state leaders that have clearly said, I can be part of that bridge, not only across the partisan divide, but also within a community that I've learned from my parents, that America first is a principle why they came here, but also that the traditional conservative mindset carries the values of what Americans believe in.
Well, you were gracious enough to come and be a guest on a show that we had entitled Campus Chaos, A Dangerous Agenda. And I was talking about college campuses across the country, including our most elite institutions, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, MIT, Penn State, what we consider our Ivy League top drawer universities, with protests led by these pro-Hamas student organizations, and what I knew at the time, and I think it's been proven to be true, outside agitators. It had become more and more apparent than ever that there's just a growing hate movement, not only for Jews and the state of Israel, but the West in general, America, our culture, our principles. We had a really in-depth conversation about all of that and why these prominent institutions had gone so haywire. I felt like clearly they weren't teaching critical thinking, or you wouldn't have been hearing and seeing what we were hearing and seeing. How did we get so far off track, Doctor?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that final question, because this was not something that happened by spontaneous combustion overnight. As we just finished Father's Day yesterday, and my wife and I have three beautiful, blessed children that are 22, 20, and 16. They're in university age, or getting there, or finishing. And I can tell you that these institutions have been corrupted over a generation. And after 9/11, as a doctor, I said, listen, terrorism is a symptom. The disease is radicalization. The disease is a faith identity that has been co-opted with national identity, has not gone through a Western Enlightenment process, secularization, that separation of church and state, and ultimately created the greatest country on the planet, which was anti-theocracy, but pro-God, under God. So not anti-religion, but pro-freedom, pro-religious liberty as our first freedom. The institutions that I'm fighting against, the theocracies of Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood, Pakistan's Islamic Republic, all of the Sharia Islamic states have not gone through that enlightenment. Similarly, in the universities, as I've testified to Congress multiple times, the radicalization of Muslims should be a telltale for what's happening across our universities and the radicalization of the left with the what we call the red-green axis. That axis that you see in the UN, where you have Iran working with the Venezuelas and Chinas of the world, with a common enemy against the West, with the little Satan being Israel, the great Satan being America, and thus they demonize us, they gaslight the West so that they can move their ideas into our institutions. And you see every institution affected by this anti-Americanism, this colonialist, anti-colonialist mentality that somehow we have to apologize for our history. We have to apologize for everything. We get gaslit into submission, and thus it becomes fueled by anti-Semitism. And you saw this in the Black Lives Matter movement, where they went city to city, destroying our institutions, espousing, Black Lives Matter was led by the Nation of Islam folks that were the most virulent anti-Semites of Louis Farrakhan and others. So this marriage has been going on for a long time between the world's far left extremist communist parties, the Marxists, and the Islamists.
But here's the thing, and talk to me like I'm 16 years old, I guess. Maybe it's my naivety. I understand the difference between the left and the right here, and I understand both sides wanting to push their agenda, but we're all Americans. And when we're getting attacked from the outside, when we've got people that are coming in and literally attacking our country on American soil, like with 9/11, they're trying to undermine our young people. The ideology that they're pushing is so clearly anti-American, anti-Semitic, anti-American. What's happened to our leadership that we don't recognize that we are under ideological attack? We were under physical attack at 9/11. We're under ideological attack now. You would think that when this becomes so blatant that people would say, hey, This is a good time to recognize we're all Americans. How are they subverting this so much?
It's very simple, actually, Dr. Phil. And I've talked about this to our Muslim kids that, when we try and so often, it's whether you're working against drug use or whether you're working against terrorism and violence and gangs, you can't just tell them, well, that's bad, don't do it. They have to have something to fill that void in their heart. So the reason I was never radicalized was because the only thing I would ever die for is America. That's why I joined the Navy. That's why I served 11 years as a naval officer. And I continued to head towards the fire, where after 9/11, we formed our foundation because I felt that I had God-given blessings from living in this country, that my parents escaped a military dictatorship and came here and taught me that I could practice my version, my interpretation of Islam more freely here than in any Muslim majority country. So with that narrative, it was a sense that the only thing that gave me freedom was my constitution and my government and the people of this country that protected those rights. So what happens with all of these institutions is that they're not teaching what's good about America. They're not giving their students, our youth, a purpose in which it can fill the void of anti-Americanism and all of the hate, because that void gets filled with just a sense of entitlement, a victimization, and the left feeds on identity politics. So whether it's the UN and Iran and China, or at Congress with Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and AOC, they share a common animus for this country, even though they're supposedly representing our constituents here. And that's the problem, is that we need to reawaken and renew. That's why my campaign is about renewing America's promise, about calling for leadership within our families, the erosion of the family, the parental leadership that has been stolen by government through DEI programs, through critical race theory, that's just destroying the foundations of Western success.
Hey, it's Dr. Phil here. You know, I bought my first gold coin over 25 years ago. I did it to protect my family and our financial future. Back then, we were living in uncertain times, and the national debt was growing larger every day. And it's similar today. Higher taxes, government debt, and an unstable economy. It's more important than ever to buy gold and silver. Like you, I cherish my faith, my family, and my financial freedom. That's why I recommend you get the Wealth Protection Kit from Goldco, the top-rated precious metals company in the country. It shows you how to diversify and protect your retirement savings. Thankfully, with Goldco, you get the peace of mind that thousands of their customers have protected their money with gold and silver. They are A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau and have earned over 6,000 five-star reviews. Right now, you could qualify for up to 10% instant match in bonus silver while supplies last. So call Goldco at 855-969-GOLD to learn more. That's 855-969-GOLD. Across this great country, from coast to coast, you've told me about the crossroads we're facing. That's exactly why I wrote We've Got Issues, How You Can Stand Strong for America's Soul and Sanity. This book isn't just a conversation starter. It's a roadmap for standing strong in the face of adversity, for embracing our core values when they're needed most. We're talking about real strategies for real people dealing with real issues, from navigating the complexities of today's polarized world to fortifying our families. And I set forth in the book 10 principles that I think are critical for a healthy society. This is not about politics. I'm not a politician, don't want to be a politician, don't know enough about politics to talk about it. But I talk about every angle of life as we know it, from family and relationships to the burning issues that are shaping our world today. We've got issues, how you can stand strong for America's soul and sanity. And you'll find it anywhere books are sold. It's about time we start addressing what truly matters. Well, I guess the campuses and the faculties have just been hijacked by so many left-leaning liberal professors that they're in this bubble and they're pushing this ideology. It's so offensive to me that they might be doing a course on art history or kinesiology, for God's sakes, but they're actually taking a captive audience and pushing their political agenda. And that's not what they were there for. It's not what they were hired for. If I had a child sent to that university and we were paying the tuition and all of that, and they were pushing this kind of political agenda on my student, I would not be happy about it. That's not what they went there for. That's not what they were there to get pushed.
And Dr. Phil, we got here because America was a meritocracy. I'm going to give you two quick examples. Number one, I'm a medical officer. I was a medical officer in the Navy, graduated on a Navy scholarship from a private medical school in Wisconsin, Medical College of Wisconsin. And I learned that you get rewarded if you are the best in your rounding ship, in your medical science, in the art, and in the bedside care. We just saw a study out of UCLA that showed that doctors graduating today have some of the worst competencies they've had in 2 generations. And that study should just frighten everybody, because this is what happens on the heels of DEI. It's no longer about meritocracy. It becomes about mediocrity and really just checking off boxes. Even our Supreme Court said that affirmative action was unconstitutional and un-American. The second is I serve on a board of an organization that looks at what's happening in our military academies. And STARS, as it's called, looks at the officer ranks and what they're being taught. Our own military academies now are recruiting in the wrong areas. They're no longer getting our best and brightest. And I learned as the son of immigrants, Dr. Phil, and this is why I'm running, that my grandfather taught me the special sauce in America is our military, that ultimately they take orders from a civilian government, and it is the most honorable thing in America to serve in our military. The militaries in the Middle East are the most corrupt mafioso type organizations that are kleptocratic, that are truly the deep state. And if we don't look at what's happening in our military today, where it's no longer a meritocracy, where it's no longer about our best and brightest wanting to serve and really just about checking off boxes, and they can't even use the word terrorism anymore because it might offend Muslims there, which is just, I find offensive, a bigotry of low expectations. And this is what's happening in the two major institutions that I've been involved in, which are medicine and military.
Well, what do we do with this? I've been very outspoken against DEI. I think that, look, everybody's talking about this equality of outcome. To me, that is absurdity. That is absolutely absurdity. You want to talk about equality of opportunity, which we don't have in America? That should definitely go on the to-do list. We should work to level the playing field, give everybody an equal start. We don't have it. We should work towards it. If we want to create any kind of level playing field, the place to do is go back to the schools in the beginning where they have a poor tax base, poor tax funding for the schools. I get it. Those schools need to be just as good in the inner city as they are out in the suburbs. They need to have the same resources, the same quality of teaching, same opportunities for those kids. I understand that. You can fix that in one generation if you give them the same opportunities. But this idea of lowering standards to reach some kind of quota, I read that same study out of UCLA. I'm sorry, I don't want a doctor that they lowered the standards in some class on anatomy and physiology or brain function or any part of medicine, and that person gets through, and then you meet them up at the hospital. I'm sorry. No, thank you.
And that's the issue, is that what we've been trying to do, and what I did for decades now since 9/11, is redefine what diversity is. We formed a Muslim reform movement that was really trying to educate the Obama administration that diversity is ideological diversity. We have a group of Muslims that are pro-Western, that are anti-Islamist, that came together because we're conservatives, liberals, feminists, gay rights activists, free speech activists, so many different. I've worked with Ayaan Hirsi Ali's organization, who's a former Muslim, with atheist groups, all of which are diverse, but joined together to say we want to save the West because secular Western liberalism is under attack globally. 70% of the world is living under dictatorship, and that is part of wokeism. And wokeism is really about the ideas that somehow our identities are all that matter. And you find medical schools, medical organizations now starting meetings saying that we we will start this meeting by declaration that this is on stolen ground. This apologia is not only pathological, it is an insult to every minority, that somehow we have this bigotry of low expectations. And I can tell you, as the son of immigrants and as an Arab American, Syrian American, whatever hyphen you want to put in front of my name, the bottom line is that my children are raised to where they want to achieve something because they earned it, not because they had a participation prize, which is what is the death knell of the future of our next generation.
Yeah, and it's so unfair because you meet one of these doctors in the hospital, for example, and everybody looks at them like, oh, did you get here because they gave you special dispensation to get here? So for the doctors that earned it, they did come up through a meritocracy. They did have excellent performance. Everybody looks at them askance like, oh, you're one of the DEI doctors. And for those who actually earned it and worked their way up, it's unfair to them because everybody looks at them like, oh, you got a free ride. And I know some doctors that deal with that every day. It's not fair to them.
And by the way, as somebody who hopes to be a future congressman, Congress has some fixes for this. And Governor DeSantis has been talking about it. There are different state and federal laws that can be simply enforced, in which you can't have preference over one race versus another. You can't simply ignore standards of education. You can't start indoctrinating people, especially in hate speech like anti-Semitism, and giving them preference over others, and then expect to get federal grants. We should be deporting folks, the students that are on privilege here to study on visa, that are espousing support for foreign terror organizations. I mean, there are things happening that the federal government, if we didn't have rubber stampers like the Greg Stantons of the world that is now representing this district here, if he actually would use his own critical thinking and had actually had the courage to censure Rashida Tlaib when she came to raise money for Students for Justice in Palestine, it would be a whole different world, and you'd see pushback, because I truly believe, and I'm finding this knocking door to door and across the district, that 80% of America in the center, we're a center-right country, but 80% across that middle don't like any of these radicalizations that are happening. And we need to, this is why right now you see so many folks coming across our border that are Hamas sympathizers, radicals. Ultimately, the Democrat Party thinks they're going to be voting, I think, for them. And that's why they don't want ID for voting, but they're also bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, and destroying our neighborhoods here as a border state.
You have it in Arizona just like we do in Texas. If we've got people, however they got here, whether it was on a student visa or whatever, if we've got foreign students here that are actively demonstrating against the United States on an American campus, why in the world do we allow those people to remain? They are working against our interest. They are sympathizing with those who are calling for a death to America, and we have admitted them into the country, and then we watch them demonstrate for our downfall. Why would we allow those people to remain in America?
This is the thing. I've been calling for vetting of people coming in before they come in, not after. And we need a real border security plan. I mean, Dr. Phil, they've been gaslighting us, saying, oh, the last plan was a bipartisan plan. I guess they call bipartisan 2 senators and a couple congressmen that are Republican that voted for it, when in fact, true bipartisanship is when a majority of the majority and a majority of the minority vote for something. And that's actually how bipartisanship works. And as the son of immigrants, my parents came here legally, and then got political asylum because they would have been imprisoned and tortured. My grandfather was in and out of prison in Syria. So these are the narratives that create and bring the people that we want in America, that are going to work harder than they've ever worked in their lives, because they appreciate the freedoms they have here. And my border security plan goes through what a real security plan would look like. I'm the only Republican in the primary here that actually has a plan, and the other candidates, actually, Kelly Cooper, who's the primary other contender, has just this pablum that seems to be out of the liberal Democrat Party. And yet, as the son of immigrants, I can tell you that, we, in respect for our immigrants, need to have a tough border plan, because then it makes immigration something that everybody can wrap their head around, can embrace, and say that's what Americanism really is.
Do you enjoy games? I'd like you to take out your cell phones and download a game called Solitaire Grand Harvest. That way you can join in on the fun. Now, Robin and I are about to have some fun here. And one of our favorites is the great app game Solitaire Grand Harvest.
I'm so in love with this game. This is not your old solitaire game. It's so much fun. It's challenging, and the little farm animal characters are adorable. Now, we enjoy playing all night long.
This is also a great way to unwind and give yourself an incredibly important mental break.
Yes, and even just a few minutes each day can make all the difference.
All right. So challenge your family and friends or enjoy the fun alone. Just go to the App Store or Google Play to download the app for free. Solitaire Grand Harvest. That way you can join in on the fun. Well, I agree. And you do have a border plan. You've got Zuhdi Jasser's border security plan. Number one, seal the border. The sheer scale of illegal immigration is overwhelming our system and laws. There's no question about that. Then number two, you say reclaim congressional constitutional authority. Congress should set immigration policy, not the president. The Constitution grants Congress the power to make all laws, including the rule of naturalization. The Supreme Court has consistently affirmed congressional authority to set immigration policy, but that's not happening. It's just not happening. And then you say intensify vetting. Is there any vetting to intensify?
That's exactly correct. Right now, the only vetting is they cross-match. As you know, last week, there were 9 different ISIS operatives from Tajikistan that were revealed to have been in 4 different cities, LA, San Francisco, New York, and they were found because they ended up being found to be cross-matched with ISIS connections and communicating with them. And luckily, nothing happened, but it needs only one to be part of that implosion, God forbid, of terror that they can bring with them with the ideologies that are anti-American. And they're not vetting. We should be vetting for, do they truly, have they come to us first, or did they come through 3 other countries? Because if they came through 3 other countries, as we're seeing, most of the people at the border are not Mexican. They've come from Bangladesh, from China, from Africa, from all over the world, and come through 5 or 6 countries before they get here. So they should get asylum in that first country. My father and mother asked for asylum in Lebanon when they left Syria. And then my dad had an internship here and got accepted. Once he got his acceptance for internship, was approved for the asylum, and then they came here to Ohio. And then ultimately I grew up in Wisconsin. So that's how asylum is supposed to be done. And I think we need leaders in Congress that get it, that are pro-immigration, but anti-illegal immigration, and have the courage to say, you know what, enough of this amnesty stuff. We need to deport Biden's illegals. The millions that have come in the last 3 years need to be deported. And then we can deal with Obama's illegals and all of the others before that are in the tens and tens of millions.
Well, we've got 3 Islamist organizations on college campuses: American Muslims for Palestine, Students for Justice in Palestine, Muslim Student Association. These are all pro-Hamas. These are people that have joined the organization. They're being funded by outside, but they have fortunately self-identified. Can we not start there and start getting these people out of here?
Exactly. But as you know, that's like the 0.1% tip of the iceberg. As you can see there, I was testifying to Congress back in 2013 on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, testifying to the Homeland Security Committee, Foreign Affairs Committees, and telling them, listen, the anti-Semitism in America is coming because at that time, Al Gore had sold his satellite television to Al Jazeera America, which is a Qatari information organization that spreads radical Islam. And if you look right now at the operations of October 7, number 1 funder was Qatar. Number 2 was Iran because of the billions that Biden released to Iran. But Qatar, through its information operation, has radicalized Muslims and Arabs across the world, and they have a viewership of 60 million a day. Now, thankfully, that Their network did not succeed. It fell apart despite the $500 million billions of dollars they dumped into it, because there was no market for it. But there was no counter narrative. As you and I were just talking before about universities, if you don't have a counter narrative about what Americanism is, why we should be unapologetically not only pro-American but anti-communist, anti-Islamist, that's part of being human beings and supporting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We don't, that's the thing, is we won the Cold War without ever firing a bullet against the Soviets, because we had a U.S. information agency, a Radio Free Europe, that was advocating for the ideas of Americanism unapologetically. And we don't have that now. And that's what I had testified before, and what we need to have through our universities here at home first, and then do it abroad.
Well, what's it going to take to get the border under control? Let's talk about that for a minute. You're there in Arizona. You've got the same border issues we have here, maybe worse, I don't know, but you got the same border issues there. What do we do to get this under control?
You get the border under control by having leaders that don't give up, that never back away from a fight, that know how to build bridges, and as far as saying, listen, I'm not going to do any other legislation until we seal this hemorrhaging. You don't seal an artery as a doctor by plugging half of it with one stitch if it needs 5 stitches. You plug the whole artery or the patient will hemorrhage to death. And that's what's happening right now. We should not take anything short of sealing it completely. And then also talk about resourcing our Border Patrol to the amount necessary to actually vet and begin to have hearings about what vetting is. How do we decide what's asylum and what's not? How do we decide who's coming in because they want to embrace Americanism, or simply coming in here because for purely economic or exploitative or infiltrative reasons? This is how we begin to fix our border. We end sanctuary cities, where Greg Stanton, who needs to be replaced, who has been a lifetime politician, when he was Phoenix mayor, advocated for sanctuary cities, which is just an abomination and a disgrace to the American law, that there's actually members of Congress and mayors across this country, as we see in California and elsewhere, that believe that cities should be sanctuary to horrific criminals that commit rape and murder and otherwise, and yet they seem to get away with it. And we're seeing a huge spike on a daily basis in these crimes. So it just, we have the wherewithal. We just need the leadership with the cachet, as I've been developing and vetted over time now, to do that in Congress.
Do you think being a Muslim hurts you in the race?
Absolutely not. I think that ultimately, I think Muslims that are not open about their ideology, that are not contrite about the parts of Islam that we need to reform, that need especially the theocratic elements. I think any Muslim that says that normative Islam is completely compatible with American constitutional liberty is either fooling themselves or ignorant or being deceptive. The reality is, yes, the Islam that my father taught, my parents taught me, that my grandparents tried to practice, I believe is compatible. But my father translated the Quran in a modern way. I wrote in my book a lot of these problems in a battle for the soul of Islam, and dedicated myself to the American Islamic Forum for Democracy that targeted these ideas. And just where, if you look before 1776 and especially 1789, even the Christian world had never understood what it meant to render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and unto God's what is God's. There are passages that need interpretation in light of modern day. Islam is 1440 plus years old. It hasn't gone through that reform. So yes, Muslims that are contrite, that are humble and open enough to say, listen, my faith practice personally is Judeo-Christian Islamic under God. It is what guides my character, my integrity, and my family values. However, the political Islam of Iran, of Saudi Arabia, of Pakistan, of the Muslim Brotherhood, of all these radical groups is incompatible, and anyone that's an operative for that should have has no business being in America and is actually an enemy of this country. But I can be the most useful in helping discern that and shed the political correctness and all of the problems that are gaslit by the Ilhan Omars and Rashida Tlaibs of the world that nobody challenges. And I can do that immediately. I can hit the ground running. I've established credibility in this area and can expand it into healthcare weaponization, DOJ weaponization, military weaponization that's been happening by the far left that I can immediately expose by the work I've been doing.
Those two, do you believe they're actually enemies of this country?
You listen to Ilhan Omar, and when she talks about Somalia, and her native tongue was translated a few months ago, she said that America was the terrorists in Somalia. And I served there. I was on USS El Paso, Operation Restore Hope, joined my ship when they returned from Somalia. And she basically had the temerity, the audacity to say, we were the terrorists when we were there in the early 90s. So I can't help but interpret that as somebody that thinks that America is the enemy, and that ultimately somehow the East's problems from Somalia to Iran is not internal, but external because of the boogeyman of America that they've created. And she ultimately doesn't understand the beauty of America's promise, why we're a shining city on the hill, why individual rights and free markets. As a small business person, the other reason I'm running is I sign the front of my checks. And I've got employees that I've taken care of for decades now in primary care in an industry that I can't adjust my prices. And I realize what American families are going through. And for those who think that America's the problem, why is it that they're rushing in to come here from all over the world? Why did the Ilhan Omars and the millions coming across our borders come here? It's because there's a promise of economic freedom, of individual rights. And they want to deny that because they have an agenda that is anti-American. And I'm sorry to say it, I do believe that when it comes to idea, they might not be anarchists, but they certainly are not friends of America. And I believe their ideas are incompatible, which makes them enemies of who we are.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I'm very troubled at some of the things that I hear them say. Now, you say that you would support a 15% flat tax?
Yes, I would.
Why?
Well, I have to tell you, first of all, anything we can do to decrease the red tape and all of the empowerment of government through deductions and other things. You have a flat tax, it makes the IRS forms much simpler and much less weaponization of the IRS, as we saw with so many things into our lives. Second, it becomes an engine of growth. What we saw missing in Carter 2.0 or Obama 3.0 with Biden is in the inflationary economy, we were missing growth. And growth is stifled by a suppression, by printing money, making money less valuable, and then ultimately increasing the burden of government taxation. So if you flatten that tax and increase growth enough, which most of the studies, and you look at Steve Forbes' work and so many others, they will show that a flat tax works and ultimately will reawaken America's engine and do that through energy, also fracking. And, we should be drilling and no longer dependent on the theocratic oil, the petro-Islam of Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, and letting our own economic engine thrive and begin to have spillover into other parts of our economy beyond energy.
Well, I've seen study after study where when you lower tax rates, you increase tax revenue. Is that what you think would happen?
Absolutely. Every study shows that the more you give Americans freedom to invest in our future, invest in their own businesses, they will have more freedom to create things that will generate more money and ultimately enlarge our economy and diversify our economy. So a flat tax rate is all about diversity. It's about diversity of economics. And listen, I've been seeing now in healthcare consolidation of the markets, where the largest employer of doctors now is no longer private practices, but it's actually Optum, it's insurance companies. And you're seeing huge consolidation, which Congress should be stepping in to protect small businesses, to allow incentives to reinvigorate that engine of small business ingenuity, where I, as the president of my clinic, can talk to my frontline folks and institute and implement their ideas for change in a much quicker way than huge metaglomerates that are like aircraft carriers that were created by Obamacare that can't be shifted. So right now, 18% of the American GDP is healthcare. If you can begin to re-operationalize free markets by lowering their tax rates and helping small businesses with incentives, you will decrease the wait time. Right now, I've talked to patients that takes them 3 to 6 months or more to find a primary care doc and even see them. So that old Obamacare nonsense in which they said, oh, you can keep your doctor, et cetera, is the biggest lie, one of the biggest lies from Obamacare. And there's so many others. And this is why not only flat tax rates, but stopping and beginning to disincentivize the private equity buyouts in healthcare and so many other things that happen in healthcare is going to take the best healthcare system in the planet and make it mediocre because we've not incentivized free markets in it anymore. It's become socialized, basically.
Well, I did a show just today, and we were talking about the fact that 97% of antibiotics are coming out of China. If you look at the APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients for these, not just antibiotics, but all of these different pharmaceutical agents, they're all coming from foreign countries. We're not getting these things from domestic labs or soils. And I'm just wondering what happens if China decides to just stop shipping that stuff. It seems to me that we could be in a real pickle, and that's been the case for at least 20 years. Why is somebody not doing something about that? And I understand that they're competing with a government, not another company, and they're paying 47 cents an hour in some of their factories and stuff over there. But it seems to me that when we're dependent on our enemy for life-saving sorts of things, we're really putting ourselves in a vulnerable position.
You're so on target, Dr. Phil, and especially after the pandemic, when we saw now the empowerment of the World Health Organization that China was driving, dictatorships are driving. And, for all the brilliance of Henry Kissinger and others in the 20th century, one of the worst ideas we've seen in the last 100 years was the open door to China that somehow, as even Clinton then articulated in the 90s, he said, oh, China, as we open and become economically engaged, will become moderated, and then ultimately the CCP will fall apart. That's not how it works. Just like with maximum pressure against Iran, as President Trump and Pompeo did, sanctions work because as long as you have a dictatorship, and I can tell you, family that's been tortured by dictatorships in Syria and across the Middle East, dictators will suck like parasites the life out of the monies that come into their country and out of every business. And ultimately, you're right. FDA reform here in America, this might be radical, but I've always said, as a liberty-minded doctor, the government's role is to make sure that small businesses, large businesses aren't exploiting and hurting the population. So yes, safety is something that I do think the government should be involved in, but not efficacy. A big part, 70 to 80% of the cost of bringing a drug to market comes from efficacy studies. Let patients, we saw in the pandemic, the government started to prevent patients from even articulating on social media whether ivermectin or other things. Listen, I didn't believe in that scientifically, but I was horrified that my government was preventing my patients from engaging in that, and that somehow we had to force vaccines, force masks. I mean, we were really, just as I talk about on my website, we were a few steps away from doing what China did by welding their patients into homes, by saying, and to prevent the spread of a virus. And we did all this disease trading and other things. So all of these things feed to one another, where a autocratic, oppressive society rationalizes step 1 and 2, and then all of a sudden step 5 and 6 into authoritarianism becomes the next steps for destroying our democracy.
Well, I've done some study on this, and I actually have it in my book, We've Got Issues. We're the highest priced medical system in the world and have the poorest delivery. There are 50 countries on the globe where a mother has a better chance of surviving birth than America. There are 50 countries in the world where the baby that's born has a better chance of surviving than in America. And when my researchers brought that to me, I kicked it back and said, nah, don't believe it. I had them go through and a second independent group research it. And they came back and said, no, that's true. There are dozens of countries on the globe where mother and baby have a better chance of surviving than in the United States of America. How is that possible?
It's because we have been deluded by the far left here in America that operationalize the concept of a right to health care. And as much as I, as a doctor, and I'm a specialist in medical ethics, and I've chaired a ethics program for one of the largest healthcare institutions in Arizona for a long time. And I can tell you that as much as the ethical principle of caring for people and providing emergency care and other things is a societal responsibility, when you mandate it, welfare rights that become mandated become a license to steal money from others as a forcing taxation without representation and all these other things that come as a result, versus our Constitution talks about inalienable rights from God versus the welfare rights that are given by others at the expense of other things. Nothing is free. So what happens is over time, as we lose the free market rewards of people working 80-hour weeks to try to develop that cure for cancer and other things, as you socialize and take away incentives, monetary and reward incentives, you then become less successful. And access to care sometimes is not really because the government doesn't provide it or society doesn't provide it. It's because of education. It's because of other cultural problems that prevent access because patients choose not to, or because they're unaware and not educated in the cultural benefit of seeking perinatal care and other things that are necessary to affect those statistics. So I think we've now connected the things you and I were talking about earlier, which is educational rot, cultural decadence, if you will, loss of the family, and then also loss of free markets and socialism, if you will, intervening in that. All of that leads to a decay in a country that has a much broader spectrum of income versus some of those countries that you were talking about that are much more narrow. If Finland and Sweden and other countries like that,
Right.
They have narrower populations, and as a result are not good countries to study when it comes to the impact of socialized economies versus free market economies.
Well, it just seems like we got too much government involved. It seems like if we'll just let people compete, we'll be a whole lot better off. And that's just not happening. One of the things that I'm really curious before we run out of time for you to talk about, and Arizona is one of the places that has the biggest problem with this, is education and the schools. I've done a lot of research about the Arizona schools, and I'm afraid that our entire educational system is quietly on the brink of collapse, that we're going to be without teachers. We're going to have classrooms that are dark, or we're going to have to double up. And instead of having 25 or 30 kids in a class, we're going to wind up having to have 50 or 60 or 70 kids in a class because we don't have enough teachers to get in there and do the one-on-one mentoring of these students and teaching these students. I know now that nationally, over 30% of fifth graders can't read a fundamental sentence, close to 30% of eighth graders can't, and 19% of high school graduates can't read the prescription labels when they go pick something up at the pharmacy. That seems to me to be near on to impossible, but yet it's true. What are we going to do to overhaul this education system, and what are we going to do with these students that have such a gap created by the mismanagement of COVID? I don't see any plan to close that gap that's equal to the gap.
Well, I think this is another reason. One of the reasons I'm running is that ultimately, as I talk to families, they're equally, just as everything you just so eloquently went through, is that families are horrified at what's going to happen to their kids and their kids' kids in the educational system. And, the left, as you heard in Biden's State of the Union, he was basically trying to, again, buy votes by saying that he would just throw more grants towards states and that somehow would help teacher salaries, when actually it becomes a power grab, that ultimately when they pay for the salary, then they can after that invoke NEA. The one of the biggest impediments to education is this union of teachers that, ultimately, while each of us have loved the teachers that got me and you and all of us to the educational level we're at, as a group, the unions, it's what kept my kids home in COVID, during COVID, for no reason whatsoever. There was not a single medical reason to keep our kids home.
None.
And yet the teachers somehow forced them to stay home for 2 years. I get it, maybe for 4 weeks until we knew what was going on. But 2 years when none of them were getting admitted, none of them were actually even getting COVID, it made no sense. And actually, my oldest now just graduated from college. He graduated with his master's in AI. And I can tell you, he missed his high school graduation and then ultimately his college graduation. Half of it was online, and it was really a horrible experience for him. And it's going to take him years to recover some of that lost engagement and true critical thinking that's brought through the classroom environment. And the bottom line is we need, and Arizona has led this. It's about school choice, that if you increase competition in education, you will then raise the bar so that students are vying for the best schools and create an environment of meritocracy, not only for the students, but for the schools themselves also. And this is what I can do as a federal official, as a federal representative, is to begin to cut off some of the entanglements that the federal government controls in these things and prevents the growth necessary, and to begin to punish some of the woke ideologies, the ideological enforcement of DEI programs, et cetera, that now are being funded to the tunes of tens of millions in each school, that can quickly overnight be fixed. The gender studies programs, the wasting of so much school time on transgenderism and other cultural phenomena that are intentionally done to gaslight our students away from the priorities of STEM education and other things. And again, bringing it back to the parental vetting of curriculum. This is why right now, Dr. Phil, I'm seeing in local as we canvass neighborhoods, the school boards are some of the most contentious, elections happening, because especially in the conservative side, right of center, they're saying, you know what, we want to take back control of our localities and our culture and who we are as Americans and as Arizonans. And they're doing that through school board elections. And that's really what has to happen.
Well, it does have to happen. We've got schools down there spending time talking to students about their pronouns. They don't even know what a pronoun is. They need to teach them the fundamentals and get them where they can read. You spend the first, second, and third grade learning to read, and then you spend every year after that reading to learn. So if you don't get the tool of reading so you can use that to gather information, you're going to be behind forevermore. And research tells us that if you're not reading at grade level at the end of the third grade, your chance of dropping out is 4 times normal. And if you're from an inner city or a minority home, it's 6 times normal. We've got to make sure that we get to these kids early and give them that learning tool of reading, and it's not happening.
100%. And this is why, they're shifting to pass fail in some schools. They're beginning to, prevent some of the actual cultural, politics, as Andrew Breitbart said, politics is always downstream of culture. And the culture right now is that there's no more shaming of grades and shaming of this and that, and everybody should get some participation credit and trophies, et cetera. Well, ultimately, this is the end of human excellence, is that you can't have excellence unless some people fail. You can't have a understanding of what mediocre is unless you have an A and B, C, D, and F grading. And they're starting to end the grading processes, which we need to stand against and say that part of, if there is any federal funding, and now even I'm listening to President Trump clapping. As I clap, he's even starting to even hint again about shutting down the Department of Education, which I'm not sure can happen. But if it does, bring it back home to the localities, because the federal government has no business. If there's any idea or issue that should be based in state rights, it's the educational system.
I've had several education shows that we've researched and done, and this is anecdotal, but I had a former Marine on that had become a teacher, and his school board required them to adjust their grades where, 90 to 100 was an A historically. Like you got a 90, it was an A minus. You got a 95, it was an A. They had them adjust where they had to drop everything down to where used to be, like 60 to 70 was a D. Well, now they've dropped it down to where 70 was a B and 60 was a C. And they were required he couldn't give anybody a 0. You had to give everybody at least a 50 if they did absolutely nothing, didn't turn in an assignment, didn't even fill out anything but their name on a test. You had to give them at least a 50. And if you didn't do that, then you were insubordinate and fired. And he refused to give somebody a 50 when they did nothing. It drives me insane.
And it's just completely un-American. You look at the numbers now, and I've been working with Ezra Nomani, who's a American Muslim whose family's from India, and she's done a lot of great work about some of the discrimination that happens against the Indian community in America because of these profiling that happens as they are prohibited admission because of profiling against certain communities. And you see the anti-Semitism where Jewish population used to be, I don't know if it was Harvard or what school, but used to be 20, 30% of the students. Now it's 3-4%.
Yeah.
So that is a discrimination that's breeding anti-Semitism. That is because of these issues, that it's no longer related to performance and merit, but simply because of checking off boxes on skin deep issues.
Yeah, when I was a sophomore in high school, I got a D+ in algebra, and I worked for that D+, my God. And now they just give it away. And then the next semester we had geometry, and I got an A. That's how concrete I am. If I could see it, if I could see the triangle, the cylinder, or whatever, I had no problem. But I didn't understand why they were putting letters in equations in algebra. I couldn't figure it out. And then I wound up just barely short of a PhD in statistics. I was so bothered by it. I have a tendency to charge things like a machine gun nest that I have trouble with and intimidated by. So I overcompensated in graduate school, but I worked for it. They didn't give it to me. I worked for it.
That's a spirit we need to reawaken.
Yeah, I coached basketball for both of my boys till they were in the 7th grade. So 7 years with each of my boys who were 7 years apart. And at the Y, you go into these age brackets where it's 12 and under. So you go in 10, 11, and 12. And when we were 10, we were like 0-14. We didn't win any games because we were the youngest in the bracket. We didn't have a pizza party and trophies at the end of the season. I said, hey, we got our ass handed to us. We didn't win any games. We're not going to celebrate. But then the next year, we were like 6-4 or something. And the next year, we dominated, and they appreciated it by the time we got to that point where we were actually winning games. All this stuff about the trophy generation, I don't get it.
Yeah, these are the lessons of sports and why I encourage my kids to do sports. And, it has a value to building character and understanding of what integrity really is. And, we can't lose that. And the DEI type stuff is eroding every aspect. And we see this with, as they've then become, some of them become professional ball players, that, you have this dichotomy of folks in professional ball that are folks of integrity and others that are simply, materialistic and seem to echo the Obama-esque, if you will, identity politic.
Yeah, there's not any DEI in the NFL or the NBA or any of that. I was just down this weekend with Steve Harvey at a ranch south of Atlanta. We had 250 fatherless boys down there for Father's Day. They were in there for a camp, and Cam Newton, the quarterback, came by. He is a big guy, by the way. He's like 6'6", 6'7", weighs about 240, 250. He'd be like tackling a telephone pole. He and I were talking to the boys, and they were all telling about how they wanted to be in pro sports. And it was so good for him to tell them, he said, yeah, let me tell you, you can jump high and run fast, but if you don't make your grades to be eligible, nobody will ever see it. They were saying, well, I make C's. He said, yeah, you'll never get into college that anybody will ever see you. So they can tell you what you want to hear now, but when you get up into those pro sports, you're going to have to earn your right to get on that field. It was so good to hear somebody tell them, you got to earn it. Isn't anybody going to hand it to you? It was so good to hear him saying all that.
100%, 100%. And, I look back and when I served in the Navy for 11 years, my last tour rather, was as a physician to Congress. And within a month, July 24th, 1998, Russell Weston Jr. shot his way into the Capitol, killed 3 police officers 20 yards from our clinic. I ran down with 4 corpsmen. We tried to resuscitate the police officers. We got them out. They ultimately did not survive. It was the time that he shot his way into Tom DeLay's office also. And, my wife and I had been married just a few months. We got married on Valentine's Day in 98. And, from that point on, I knew that this country is just amazing, is that ultimately whatever we choose to put ourselves in, we have to give back. Our legacy has to be about, regardless of what we're in, whether it's sports, military, healthcare, media, we have to think about what is the country we're leaving behind. Is it better than the one we found when our parents, gave us birth? And ultimately, this is why I'm running. I want, and my family wants to leave in America, in Arizona, a district that's better than how we found it. And that's not what we're seeing right now in every institution. And I think I'm able more than any other primary candidates to give to my community, as I have been as a primary care doc and in against so many of our enemies, and also during the pandemic. I can do things that none of the other candidates can do. And this is my first time running for office. The other candidates have run. Kelly Cooper lost by over 12 points to Greg Stanton. We can win this district. And, folks out there, go to our website at z4az.com, Z4AZ, and tell your family and others about our campaign, because I can hit the ground running and counter the Rashida Tlaibs and Ilhan Omars overnight. And that's why we've been able to build the coalitions from the Charlie Kirks to the, Governor Brewer, Senator Kyle, Hugh Hewitt, and others. So it's an amazing time to be an American.
Well, we're showing a highlight reel right now of a lot of your activities, and you need a few more diplomas on your wall. Only got about 100 there. You need to spend more time in school. But let me give you the last minute here to tell voters in your district, A, why they should vote for you, not somebody else, and B, why they should not stay home and not vote at all.
Well, my family and I, if there's ever a time in which our country can correct its direction, can right the ship's direction, it's now. And it's through voting for the right candidates that have the integrity, that have the history, that have been battle vetted and battle tested. I believe in an America of hope and an America of the American dream, not only of owning a home and a business, but of raising a family that can embody and epitomize the values that are Americanism. And we need elected officials that can do that. And the lifetime politicians like Greg Stanton should be retired, and he needs to be retired and has lost touch with America. And I can tell you, as an activist, our members of Congress should not forget what it is to be an activist, the issues that matter, to prevent the weaponization of Congress and the government. And ultimately, as we see, President Trump now is able to put those policies into place, but he needs a larger majority. And I'm in a swing district. And if I win my primary, I can then be the candidate that can defeat Stanton. So go to z4az.com. Help me win my primary so I can defeat Stanton and widen that margin, so that we're not living on a razor thin edge of 1 or 2 members, but rather 20, 30 members of a Republican majority, so that we can enact Trump's agenda, conservative agenda, as I've been proven to be a conservative since I was writing my column in high school called On the Right Track. So Congress is not a place for on-the-job training for people that just recently decided. My main opponent just decided to be a Republican a year before he ran in 22. So that's not the place for OJT, on-the-job training. So I can bring change. Go to Z for AZ, support us, call your friends to volunteer for our campaign here in Tempe, Mesa, and across the county. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Phil.
Well, let me say this. I've had Dr. Jasser on the show, as I said before, when we were talking about campus chaos and all this anti-Semitic, pro-Palestinian nonsense going on campus. And when we do a show, we decide what we're going to do it on. We outline what we're going to talk about, and then we look for the top experts that we think have the most relevant information about what we talk about, and then we do extensive pre-interviews with them. If they've written books, we read them. I read them. We go into a deep dive before we put somebody on the show. We don't just book whoever's handy. I mean, I've been on the air for over 2 decades, so I have the ability to really pick and choose who I want to have on the platform. I'm very blessed in that regard. I have what I call a brain room. It's a group of researchers, former college professors that have hired away from top universities. And if we have a guest that we're looking at, like Dr. Jasser, we fact check everything that they say, everything that they've written about a particular subject. And we did that with Dr. Jasser, just like we do with all of our other guests. I invite you to do this. You've heard everything we've talked about today, and you've heard Dr. Jasser make some statements. You've heard him refer to things in his book. You've heard him talk about things about the border, about the government, about education, etc. I invite you to fact check everything that he has said here today. I invite you to fact check both of us, but primarily him. You know me. Fact check him. I defy you to find something that he's just throwing around. You're going to find that's not what he does. He knows what he says, and he says what he knows. He stays in his lane, and he talks about the things that matter to the people who care. And I think when you do that, you're going to find out that this is a guy that does his homework and speaks the truth. His book is The Battle for the Soul of Islam. He talks about a lot of facts in there. It's an American Muslim's patriot's fight to save his faith. I think when you get in there, you could do the same thing. Fact check everything that he's saying. You're going to find out somebody that speaks the truth. Then you can decide if it's the truth that you want to support. And I got a sneaking suspicion it is. Doctor, it's been my pleasure to talk with you again. I hope this is not the last time we get a chance to do this. We talked about a lot of things, but we did scratch the surface on some of them. And I know you're busy. I know you got a lot of stuff coming up, but I hope we can do this again soon.
Anytime. You name it, I'm there. You're the best. I appreciate it, Dr. Phil.
You've got a home here at Merritt Street, I guarantee you. We'll talk to you again, sir.
God bless you.
All right. Best of luck. Talk soon.